There's no doubt that stepping foot into Disneyland does something to you, affects you in some magical way that's hard to explain. But in 1978, Imagineer John Hench attempted to do just that, to give a psychological interpretation of Disneyland and explore exactly why it's designed to make us feel the way we do. So let's dig into this fascinating psychological interpretation of Disneyland and discover why Disneyland is good for us in ways we may never have noticed before. In a 1978 interview with New West magazine, John Hench gave us his thoughts about the key messaging of Disneyland and how those ideas are communicated throughout the park. He stated that one of the key messages of Disneyland was that you're going to be okay. When we think about this in the context of what his generation lived through, the importance of the message really hits home. Most had survived through 2 world wars and a Great Depression. Some, like Walt Disney, had their childhoods stolen away by the necessity of working at a young age to help keep the family afloat. Their whole lives had just been a string of survival. And so the idea of a place that reminded you that you were okay, that you were safe, wasn't so much magical as it was necessary. Which is why I think Walt Disney insisted on Disneyland being for adults as much as it was for kids. He said, "All people are children," because he knew that inside every one of us is a smaller version of ourselves that we have a harder time accessing as we grow up and grow weary of the world around us. I love how John Hench put it, that Disneyland isn't about escapism, it's about reassurance. We'll see this theme of reassurance and safety come back again, woven throughout this interpretation. But for now, let's talk about what you see as you move through the park and how it affects you, beginning with the moment you step into Disneyland. John Hench said there's a sense of order at Disneyland, just like there is in a movie. You have to view the scenes in a specific order for the story to unfold correctly. Scene 5 doesn't make sense if it falls before scenes 1 through 4. You can't be dropped into the middle of a movie and understand what's going on. So Imagineers chose to control the way you experience Disneyland in a specific order, to tell the story of Disneyland in a way so that you slowly become part of it as you crossfade from one scene into the next. Think about it like this. How odd would it feel to walk under Disneyland's arch tunnels and immediately be placed in Adventureland? Dropped into the middle of the jungle where the vibe is all mystery, exploration, and adventure. Especially if you were someone in 1955 who had never experienced a theme park like Disneyland before. You'd likely be confused and possibly a little overwhelmed. Imagineers knew that you needed to first feel a sense of safety, comfort, and familiarity before you could embrace curiosity and head off into an adventure. And that's why we enter the park on Main Street, USA. But this street's peaceful, happy feeling comes from the fact that it's full of hidden messages. John Hench said Disneyland's Main Street is nostalgic, but nostalgic for what? There's never been a Main Street like this one, pristine, scaled down, and visually harmonious. But according to Hench, the beauty of Main Street is not that it makes you nostalgic for a particular place, but rather that it reminds you of some things about yourself that you've forgotten about. The small size of the buildings, purposefully created to be pony-sized, as Walt called it, are scaled down because they're meant to be reassuring. Large buildings and soaring skyscrapers, in contrast, are intimidating and can make us feel small and insignificant. But the quaint size of Main Street's buildings makes you feel larger, more confident and capable, reminding you that you can handle anything the world throws your way. Even the design of the buildings themselves lends itself to reassurance. According to Hench, the slimness of the columns on the building are exaggerated, communicating that they have nothing to fear, that they don't have to brace for impact because a building with thin columns knows it's not going to be attacked. One side of Main Street is acutely aware of the other, and the architecture all speaks to one another. As Hench explained, the City Hall designer clearly didn't hate the Opera House designer. Everything on Main Street is coordinated in the way it's designed. Hench said between the Penny Arcade, the Candy Palace, and the Sunkissed Citrus House, there is plenty of architectural variety on Main Street, but they all have a harmony running through them, a single theme. Disney has removed all visual contradictions. Hench said our regular lives are filled with a million things that have no visual cohesion, like cities that have gasoline signs next to Gothic towers, which our brain interprets as chaos. As he put it, we have a couple of million years experience with chaos, and we know that it's the next step before conflict. And we have experience with conflict also, and it's something that doesn't endorse our survival potential, so cities are threatening. But the order here in Disneyland works on people to create a sense of harmony. They feel more content in a way they can't explain, which is why something happens at Disneyland that doesn't many other places. You find strangers talking to each other without fear. And you also see them wave. In our everyday lives, we don't usually acknowledge strangers walking down the street. Many of us avoid eye contact and certainly don't smile at people we don't know. We all just go about our lives. But in Disneyland, we feel the safety and freedom to wave to people as they float by on the Mark Twain or ride by on the train, and we smile in response because it connects us. We feel seen. We come out of the cocoon of self-containment that we've created for our survival in the outside world and allow ourselves the joy of a simple and innocent exchange because we feel safe. And that's not the only relief we feel from our everyday lives. Disneyland's design also reduces our decision fatigue, the exhaustion we feel from having hundreds of micro decisions to make every day. As Hench explained, if you're at a state fair or something, everything clamors for you. So you look and you try to make sense out of things. You try to decide and you constantly make a lot of judgments. But here, when we come to a point in the park that we know is a decision point, we put two choices. We try not to give them 7 or 8 so that they have to decide in a qualitative way which is the best of those. You just give them 2. Then we get them further along and they have another choice, but we're not giving him 4 to begin with. We unfold these things so that they're normal. This allows guests to move through the park where, outside of the Plaza Hub, there are very few decisions to be made besides one way or another, giving our minds a break from the thousands of decisions we have to make on a daily basis. The same is true of the way we experience reimagined real-world places like New Orleans Square. It's like New Orleans, but without all of the visual contradictions, without the scars from humanity. Hench said, it's like poetry. It condenses everything down to its essence. It has caught the essence of New Orleans. He also pointed out that Disney's version smells better too, without the heavy humidity, which I find a little ironic considering the pirate water smell is one of our favorite parts of New Orleans Square now. Speaking of New Orleans, Hench mentions how the Haunted Mansion offers us something we need: a safe relationship with mortality. He said, this is another curious building. I think most people expected us to make a Charles Addams ruin here. That was my first opinion. But Walt said, no, I don't want a ruin over there. I don't want a ruin anywhere. He gave us a whole outline of what ghosts were supposed to do. He said they've committed something or other and they have to live out their crime, act it out, and they need an audience. He criticized the British for tearing down all their old houses and thus cutting short the ghosts' terms of going through their particular crime. So Walt said, we'll have the best audience in the world, and I hereby invite all your old ghosts that are homeless to come and live with me. I've got hot and cold running chills and wall-to-wall freaks. Hench further explained that this version of the mansion, based on Baltimore's Shipley Lydecker house, is a nice-looking house and it's not a grim thing at all. It's kind of funny, and it gives people a relation with even the dead. The Haunted Mansion approaches the grim subject of death with humor, giving us a reprieve from fear and grief, making the afterlife not seem quite so scary after all. Walt had other opinions that impacted the design of Disneyland as well. One day, Hench commented on the intricate details and work being put into the stagecoaches that would carry guests through Frontierland. Hench said to Walt, I don't think people are going to appreciate it. And Walt said, if they don't appreciate it, if you do something and people don't respond to it, it's because you are a poor communicator. But if you really reach them and touch them, they will respond. Walt believed in the good in people. The people are basically decent, and Imagineering's job was to help bring that quality out and remind them of who they really were. Because the thing is, people need that reminder of their potential, of who they could be, of who they want to be. And that's why the carousel horses are white in Fantasyland. At least, they are now. But when Disneyland opened, they were different shades of white, black, and brown. Hench said they weren't white originally, but we painted them, because they found that most children wanted to ride on a white horse, since they'd learned that heroes always ride white horses, while villains always had black ones. A white horse is what you're supposed to ride to glory on, and guests wanted to be the hero. Which, when you think of it, is what most every ride in Disneyland makes us. The storytelling allows us to embrace fearlessness in a safe way. As Hench put it, Disney rides first expose you to a threat and then take the threat away. You overcome, win the day, and walk away feeling like you can do anything. Like, for example, how you narrowly escape hippos and piranhas in the Jungle Cruise, or how Pirates of the Caribbean sends you through a burning town of marauding pirates, or how a speeding bobsled narrowly escapes an encounter with an abominable snowman. But in order to feel that sense of overcoming adversity, Disney's Imagineers knew that it was necessary to supply threats and then disarm them. As Hench put it, all these experiences go back to one universal human dynamic: survival. And that brings us to one of my favorite explanations for one of the oddest things in Disneyland: the castle at the center, at the end of the turn-of-the-century Main Street, USA. Walt's amusement park peers called it foolishness to have such a structure which, at the time, was completely empty and served no purpose. It was a financial sinkhole because it would earn no money. Walt saw it differently, though. It was not only a visual hook to draw you further into the park, but also an anchor, something people could, back when the trees were smaller, see from any location in the park to gain their bearings and find their way back to the Central Plaza. But John Hench explained the meaning of the castle in a more profound way. He explained that castles, historically speaking, were a stronghold, a place of safety for the entire community, both inside and outside its walls. It's where people would go to when they felt threatened. And so the castle is that for us as well. It represents the safety we need, the protection from that which harms us. But not only is it a stronghold, it's a home as well. As Hench says, Sleeping Beauty Castle is every man's home, a place that we can return to year after year, and it's always there, anchoring us as much as it did the park. And so we've come full circle back to the key idea of why we love Disneyland, why we return to it again and again, because we need the reminder that everything is okay. In the real world, we are hypervigilant to threats and the chaos in our environments, which causes us to create mental space from it, cut ourselves off, to isolate ourselves to keep ourselves safe. But that's often how we find ourselves alone. In Disneyland, we learn that we can survive hard things. We feel the freedom to remember who we used to be, and are reassured of our safety. As we are immersed in order and beauty, suddenly we feel things we perhaps haven't felt in years, and we start to come back to life. The magic of Disneyland is in those moments when we gaze at turrets and wave to strangers, as we walk down the orderly Main Street, USA, or laugh with grim-grinning ghosts. It's in what John Hench said was the essential message of Disneyland, that there's nothing to fear, and that you're going to be okay. Thank you so much for taking the time today to think deeply about Disneyland with me and why it carries more meaning for us than we may be aware of on the surface. If you like obscure Disney history and you want to learn more, I hope you stick around and subscribe. And if you want a little more inspiration interwoven with Disney history, I also have a book on Amazon called A Glimpse of the Magic: Finding Ourselves in the Disney Story.